Our next talk is from some of my colleagues at Thoughtworks. We have Sina, Jahan, Danilo, Sato, and Emily Gorcenski, three of the data leaders that we have in our organization. Emily helps lead a service line. Danilo is one of our global thought leaders in the data space. And Sina was actually one of the core members of the very first data mesh project that we had as an organization, which means the very first data mesh project in existence. And in this session, those three will share some of the lessons they've learned helping clients adapt a data mesh mindset, including whether or not they're ready to adopt a data mesh approach. I made the analog to microservices previously. In the early days of microservices, there was a pretty well-known article from Martin Fowler talking about you must be this tall to do microservices because of the immaturity of the ecosystem. And that's probably true to a large extent with data mesh as well. So they'll talk about the prerequisites, organizational assessment, and blockers that they faced on the journey. So please take it away.
Well, thank you all for joining today. We are here to talk about the best and worst days of data mesh. We'll be discussing some of the common questions that we get around data mesh transformations. For example, when are we ready for a data mesh? What do we need to do to get ready for a data mesh? And what goes right and what goes wrong in adapting to the data mesh way of working. My name is Emily Gorcenski. I am the data service line lead for Thoughtworks Germany. And I'm joined here by my colleagues who will engage in this lovely discussion on the ideas and what works and what doesn't with data mesh. Over to you, Danilo.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. I'm Danilo Sato. I am the head of data and AI for Thoughtworks in the UK, and also keen to have this conversation with you today. Sina?
Sina Jahan. I play the data practice lead for North America, and happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks for joining. So I guess to start off, one of the major misconceptions that I see, and maybe you all can talk about whether or not this is the same for you, is that a lot of people come to data mesh expecting that it's another architecture, right? It's like a different version of a Lambda architecture, or it's very tech focused or engineering led. And one of the challenges I have is trying to explain that data mesh is part technical and it is part architectural, but it's so much more than that. It's more of a business transformation. It's a way of looking at data governance. It's a way of coupling data strategy to business strategy, to technology strategy. And it's also a way of bringing sort of a product focus into the ways that we work with data all throughout the stack, from the operational side of things all the way up to the analytics and the reporting. And data mesh really needs to touch all of the different parts of your technology stack and your automation chain. And that just by focusing on the technology, we kind of maybe miss the forest for the trees. Is that the same in your experiences, or maybe it's a little bit different in your regions?
I can speak for my experience in the UK. It's quite relevant, I think. People probably underestimate the business and organizational impacts. If you're really talking about adopting data mesh, I don't think you can do it just from a technology perspective. You can obviously take the principles and make your tech implementation more aligned with the principles of data mesh. But if you're really talking about, the data products and the domain owning the data, then you really have to think about a lot of the data probably already exists in the organization. Who is responsible for that? And we're bringing more responsibility for those people to say, now we want you to also be responsible for making your data usable within the company. And that's the type of conversation that gets often overlooked, I think. It's the organization impact. Maybe you're adding responsibility on existing teams, or you're asking existing people to play more roles, or to embrace new skill sets, to bring data thinking into the operational world, if you're thinking that side. And it's quite an interesting one, because you can design your domain boundaries and in theory very, very well, or you think you've got it right for the whole organization. But then when you try to map that out to the actual teams and the people that will own and the systems that exist, then it starts getting very complicated. And then you layer on the data mesh, new things you're trying to build around that. It can get very, very messy.
Sure. There are a couple of things that we can talk about when it comes to beyond the technology aspect only. One is to Danilo's point about the team structure. Like in a typical Fortune 500 enterprise, when you look at how an organization looks at the data, there is definitely some centralized teams. When you talk about domain ownership as a principle, and it sounds very nice, it sounds very intuitive. Of course, the domain should own their data. It definitely has organizational impact. How is this work going to get funded? What are the team structures? What are the roles? Like we keep talking about, even the data as a product it's a product. A product has a product owner. A product owner is a new role. It's not a normal product owner. It's a data product owner. That job title doesn't even exist today. Of course, it's a general concepts of a product ownership, and there's we can borrow from the same design thinking principles, but you need some change management in the organization to go from those centralized data lake teams or data warehouses team and change that mindset of how you look at the ownership of the data. The role of the IT, I'm using air quotes, is I'm providing the tools for you so that as a domain, as a business unit, you can onboard, manage, share your own data with the consumers. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is when people are talking to us about data mesh, it has to be as a part of their data strategy. This cannot be, hey, here's we read about this, we got excited about this, let's create a platform. While that sounds very interesting from a technical point of view, and there are gaps in the industry from the tooling side, which makes this actually a very cutting edge part of the technology. None of these organizations are going to be successful at adopting it if it's not married to data strategy. What do we mean by being a part of data strategy is usually inside the organization, there are some business outcomes. Like you're trying to unlock new sources of revenue, increasing the revenue, generate more revenue from the existing sources, reducing some operational costs, reducing risks, things like that. And those are usually from a very top layer of organization, from a C-level of organization. Those are the goals that they're after in enterprise. Any bets that we do in the area of adopting a data mesh has to marry itself to those goals. It doesn't matter what kind of framework and platforms are guys using for adopting, for tracking your organizational goals. Usually you hear OKRs or lean value trees, or it doesn't really matter what. But when we enter the organizations that are ambitious enough to want to try a new approach for their data, it has to start from there. It has to start, okay, where are you at with your data strategy today? Have you guys even done a data strategy exercise? We take that input from the organizational goals, and the platform strategy and the data mesh strategy will feed into that. And that's kind of our own sanity check of, are we on the right track as you go through this? Are we unlocking new sources of revenue? Like we see that, I'm seeing this at a couple of clients where the main motivation is actually not generate more revenue from the existing sources. The idea of a data mesh is, if I have domain ownership, which results in higher quality inside the domains, and I can put all of these domains back together to have a holistic view of the data of the organization, I can actually find new sources of revenue that no one has thought about. We can think of changing the business model around that data. One of our clients who is selling, who has been a long pharmaceutical player, is using the data mesh approach to now create insights and sell the insights to the customer, which was not a thing that company used to do. So yeah, the main two aspects to Daniel's point and Emily about the organizational part and the data strategy part.
Yeah. I think also a lot of people that I speak to, they look at the data mesh materials and they look at the way the data mesh differs from sort of the conventional architectures, right? The data warehouse, data lake, or even streaming first architectures, which are very centralized. And they look at this, and they say, yes, the centralized platform is a bottleneck. And those are familiar problems. I have bottlenecks in my central platforms. And of course, everyone does. Every client I speak to, there is some sort of throughput issue in their centralized platform. And it's not systems, it's not computational, it's not resources, it's not technology resources. It's the ability for people to do the work and to find the engineers and to get the right alignment. And they say, well, so data mesh, it doesn't have a centralized platform, therefore there's no bottlenecks, right? And I think that we need to caution a little bit around that, because data mesh can solve your bottleneck issues, but it's actually not about solving the bottleneck by decentralizing the platform. It's about solving the bottleneck by shifting the responsibilities and the sort of burden of ownership into the right parties, so that you are no longer trying to centralize that work and you're no longer delegating that responsibility to people who don't have that sort of context around the data or around the use case. I see this all the time, right? Business puts a set of requirements onto some team, and then they shift that into a data platform. And now this poor data platform team is owning all of this business logic that they are one or two or more levels abstracted from the source of that business logic, right? Mm-hmm. And that becomes a really unsustainable thing to manage. So I think that in terms of data mesh readiness, if we're only looking at it to try to solve a bottleneck problem, I think that there's still more work that we need to do, because all of those concerns around the responsibility, the cost of ownership, the value, the return on investment at a granular level, there's a lot of work that we need to do to prepare an organization to be able to measure, quantify, and leverage those things at that scale. It's this move from the systems mindset where we're funding systems to this product mindset where we're actually funding and getting value directly out of the products.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick like two examples, I guess, to talk about like a bad day, good day kind of analogy, because I've seen this play out in different organizations. And the bad one was they were trying to apply, it wasn't even data mesh, they weren't calling that, but trying to apply like the domain principle to how they deal with data across the organization. So they saw that as a way to improve it, but they were doing it as an isolated group within the data part of the organization, right? So they have everyone else that owns or produces data everywhere else, and they're trying to solve that problem, applying the right principle, but in a bubble, right? So they don't own that data. They're trying to get data from other places, and then no matter how good the intention is to try to do that in that bubble, if you're not actually devolving that ownership to the sources, the people that are actually producing that, then you're going to have limited success, because you will have to create your view, I guess, of the organization's data based on your interpretation of the domain. You're not actually kind of creating the impacts that you could. So that's one bad example. And the good one, I think, is a client that we're working on a data mesh journey now, where as soon as we realized, like we mapped out, so to your point, Sina, about the strategy, they had that like really well articulated even before we arrived. Like that was quite surprising, where they, look, we've got these value cases, this is going to deliver this much value to the business. And we use that to make the kind of the business case to start going on the journey. And we use that to map out which products do we need to build first, right? So to deliver this value case, you don't need the full data mesh. Like we will need these 3 or 4 data products, and we need this much of the platform in place. Mm-hmm. As soon as we start modeling that, we realize actually this source data already exists, right? It's a team that you have on the operational side that creates that data, manages that, and they should really own that data product, not us. building it as an afterthought. So we very early on engaged with that team to talk to them about like, look, this is something that we're doing from a data mesh architecture. We think this is a data product, but you own this data because you manage and you produce this. We're going to help you build the first version of this data product because we know you're busy, you've got your backlog of features to work on. But it was kind of like an enabling team symbiosis. We'll see the team to help build the first version with you. We're going to involve you in all the design decisions so that long term, you can actually take that ownership. And that's how you can actually affect, right? Because now, as soon as you find more of those, of course, it's more work because you have to do all the enabling with them. It's not something that you can quickly build on the side, but that's where you get the long-term value from this investment because you're starting to seed the data product thinking in the right places across the organization.
For sure.
And I think that product focus is really important to really start small with that, sort of discrete product and to let it take you where it's going to take you as you do that exploration, as you map that data, as you identify those users. At the same time, I think that you do have to be prepared to understand that you cannot just simply focus on the data products without also looking at the governance concerns and the platform concerns and the technology concerns, of course, right? And so, yes, we can't just technology our way into a data mesh, but if we don't have certain fundamental capabilities, it becomes much, much harder. We had an example once where we started building products in the style of data mesh, and by keeping the focus in that team and in that sort of use case, we didn't have enough influence over like the technical architecture that they had. So principles like continuous delivery in the cloud, we didn't have control over the deployments of the products or the lifecycle management of the data assets. And then it became nearly impossible to build a data mesh from that product from the ground up without also trying to influence the way that they're using the cloud, the way that they're using that technology. So I think, the flip side of what I was saying earlier is you don't want to just focus on the technology. At the same time, there are minimum sort of requirements that you need, I think, to begin this data mesh transformation.
Yeah, you touched up on a couple of interesting points. The maturity of the organization from the technology standpoint, from the agility standpoint. Like a lot of times when you think about agile, okay, I have the Scrum, I have the retrospectives, very agile. The other parts of the agile, which is the product's life cycle of agile, is kind of get missed. And we see that some of our clients, when you are even at the very early stages, you're trying to find the sponsors for this engagement and for this transformation. And everyone is very excited about this. And we say, okay, so where are who are the business domain owners who are going to partner with us when we are incubating this on the very early days, which is very important. And so, we have some business domain owners, and the business domain owner is really someone in IT who is really close to that domain. It's like, while that can be a good start, that's not the main point. It is this thing is beyond the IT organization. This really requires the business unit owners to be embedded inside this incubation. And that can sometimes be a hard thing, to your point, Emily, because at some point there is no buy-in yet. People have not thought that, hey, yes, let's do this. And creating that partnership from the day one is sometimes a big challenge for the change agents inside the organization. The other aspect that you mentioned from like technology maturity, of course, if you're from how mature you are on your practices about things like continuous delivery, continuous integration, it's going to be a challenge to adopt the same ideas on the data side when if you still haven't you don't have that domain ownership on the services and your microservices and transactional system side. It can be a hard thing to do both of these things at the same time. I would start with the transactional systems first. If you have already started thinking about your domain, decomposition of the complexity inside your transactional application, that's probably a safer bet to start and create those capabilities inside your organization before applying those principles to data, which, to be fair, we are new in this. This is not a concept that has been around for a very long time. And you're gonna find challenges inside the organization, which not every organization has the appetite for those kind of challenges.
This leads me to, I think, a question that everyone probably has as well. I want to throw it out to the group. Given all this complexity and the size of the change, is there like a point where people need to think, am I ready for data mesh? Is data mesh really the right thing that I need to apply for my organization? How do you think about that question?
I think you need to be clear about what problem you are trying to solve with data mesh before you begin that journey, because we're not ready to retire the era of the data warehouse or the data lake. Those are still things that are very viable and will continue to be viable for many years if you use them right. And in fact, they even have a place in some data mesh architectures as well, right? So we're not saying delete your data lake. What we are saying is look at your strategy and figure out, are you ready to use the data mesh and really take advantage of what it offers? And what it offers is this ability for product teams or domains to be more autonomous, to use data to drive their own decision-making in terms of products, in terms of direction of the business. If you're not ready, if you don't have the structure in place to support that way of working, let's get you to that place before we start talking about undergoing a data mesh transformation. From a technical point of view, I think that there's also a little bit of readiness that you do need, because to be quite frank, a lot of the extreme programming, a lot of the agile techniques that we have seen develop in the microservices era, in the DevOps era, did not translate to the data landscape. We still see a lot of patterns and ways of working in the data universe that feel very much the way that ops felt 10 years ago. And so ideas like data pipelines as code are still radical ideas. The ideas of integrating testing into data pipelines is still a fairly novel concept. And there's a lot of work that we can do to get your teams ready to make a data mesh transition much less painful without having to do the entire organizational rework that a data mesh may entail. So before we go and say, do I need a data mesh? It's more like, okay, let's talk about continuous delivery. Let's talk about data quality testing. Let's talk about your governance point of view and how are we going to automate the basic things before we put this huge dependency on integrating automated governance into every product that we build. You need to start small and build up.
For sure. One of the ways that you could start thinking about this transition, and different organizations are different and each client is different. We can see that when we start thinking about this, you can think of an approach of starting from a top-down approach, which is, let's just step back. Let's look at all the big building blocks of the organization. Let's look at all of the business units. Let's figure out what are our domain boundaries. Figure out what are the most important products to build across the organization, and then start planning from that point of view. The other view that sometimes works, and you can probably have a hybrid of these two depending on your client, is to start from the bottom up, which is you start with the most ambitious goals. You have a funnel of different business goals that can be a driver for this transformation. You prioritize and you find something that are suitable for this platform journey. Probably not your most risky item, probably not your for one of our clients, one of the most important thing was the financial reporting for the stock market. Maybe that's too risky to start. Something in between, and use those business drivers and work backwards. So in order for get to this data for this business goal, what are the source aligned data products that you need to build? From those ones, where are the sources of the system, and work backwards. And okay, let's deliver this use case first. Let's go to the next use case and next use case. And you can see the domains and starting to emerge very organically. There is no right or wrong answer here. We have seen clients who definitely benefit from the bottom-up approach, especially when you don't really have buy-in and you're trying to get the other business units to see the value in this and try to build a business case. Usually you can get a lot of good wins, as early wins through the bottom-up approach. But sometimes we have also seen that doesn't work very well if your business units and the domain thinking of the organization is not really aligned to the most important problems. So one example is the organization is growing through merger acquisition. There is no way right now to see any analytical information about our products. And that's the most important thing. But the product information is siloed in 200 different applications in different legal entities. And that is the most important thing that everyone needs today, not today, yesterday. So for those ones, maybe starting bottom up might be actually risky because you're going to get lost into a lot of different governance rules of different legal organization. And that domain of the product from aggregation of all these things, it may not even emerge until a year from now, and that might be too late. Sometimes starting from that top down and putting your bets on the things that are more that needs more aggregation up front might be better. Have you two seen the same kind of pattern in your clients?
Yeah, I think like you said, a mix of both. The two approaches make sense, but even when we do the top down, at least the way that we do at Thoughtworks, I guess it's in our DNA to think things more incrementally and try to deliver value fast. We will try to, slice down to what's the smallest thing that we can start to deliver the value right away or as quick as possible, which it allows us, like, it's almost like a realization, like even if you do top down, you have to accept that that plan is going to be wrong, right? Because if you're trying to plan 3 or 5 years time, the technology is changing so fast, even like with data mesh principles in mind, there's going to be some new product that will show up that maybe solves the problem better, right? So we do need to accept that it's more like a guiding North Star where we're going towards, and this makes sense as a journey, but the starting point is kind of what you want to define. That will look more like the bottom-up approach that you described, and it gives a room for you to learn and the domain boundaries to emerge. And it is another blocker I think people have is like, oh, if I don't get the design right up front, then I cannot start. And I wanted to kind of remove that bottleneck. I don't think that's true, because it doesn't matter how much time you put up front, you have to accept it's not going to be perfect and things will have to adapt. So it's more important to find a small enough slice that can get you going than get paralyzed by trying to define the whole thing all at once.
I completely agree. And I think that's one of the things that I see often is that we try to bring things into this like grand harmonized sort of unity in this data space, whether it's building a harmonized schema or trying to have a single data platform that's going to manage everything. If you approach the data mesh with that mindset, it's probably not going to work as well as it could. What we want to do is keep it flexible, and the idea that our data landscape should change because our business is changing, and the world is changing, and data is simply a reflection of what's going on in the rest of the world. So we need to actually build in these systems that are adaptable to change. And if I think that data mesh offers one thing that is superior to every other data approach that has come before it, it's that it is much more amenable to small and rapid adjustments in the way that we are doing things, the way that we are using data, and that there's more than one potential solution to every problem, rather than the one best solution that we then try to shape our entire business around. So I definitely think that it is important to actually fly at both flight levels. Like, you need to have that change management sort of top-down approach, but you actually need to be able to experiment to see what works and what doesn't from that product point of view, and actually lead the innovation by doing, and use that sort of top-down approach to ensure that that innovation is being coupled to the business objectives, right? You don't want just people building whatever they feel like building. It still needs to have a purpose. With that said, I guess I have one more question for you all, and that is, given the complexity, given the sort of challenge that data mesh could have, is there a minimum size of a business that should be looking at data mesh? Like, could you be too small to consider data mesh at any point?
Very good question. Like, since we have talked about this, we are getting a lot of interest from companies of all different sizes. You see small startups. I'm talking at the scale of 100. You see the digital scale-ups of digital native organizations who even started after the era of the boom of the data warehousing, I would say, and also you can see the 500-pound gorillas and massive organizations who are trying to remove the bottlenecks from centralized parts. So that's a very relevant question about, is this for everyone? And I've realized that different organizations, when they talk about data mesh from different sizes, they mean different things. For a lot of the smaller organizations, that the value of removing a centralized data lake and data warehouse and bringing the producer and consumers closer together, that's already a given for some of them. They're already doing it based on principle. The people who are providing the analytical data and the people who are creating the data are sitting at the same desk, virtual desk in the COVID era Zoom days. So they have already got that idea in place, but they're interested in the mesh from different aspects. They're interested from the point of data as a product, and even packaging all of those things in a cohesive unit so that it is much more consumable by internal and external use cases, which I find very, very interesting. So the idea has definitely resonated and has hit a nerve, but people are coming to it from different angles depending on their organizational size.
Yeah, I agree. I think like the bottleneck problem that we talk about solving, if you're a small company, you probably don't see that. So in that sense, like maybe you don't need data mesh yet. But what I agree with you, Sina, is the principles of data mesh, like even if you're building that as a centralized team, building one single data product or a few within the same kind of environment, the idea of thinking about domain, thinking about data as a product, like many of those principles is things that you can start putting in place as you grow your central kind of solution, which will make it easy when you hit that scaling point where like the other more complex pieces of data mesh will start being needed, then you'll make that transition easier. So I think you can, I guess it will be a Jahan question, will that still be data mesh or not if you're only following some of the principles? But I find them really useful regardless of the size. But yeah, the full vision probably only makes sense when you hit a certain size of complexity.
For sure. This was a fun conversation. I think we need to start wrapping it up. We are available for Q&A, and we're gonna switch to that mode. We're gonna be around and answer your questions. Feel free to put them in, and we'll talk more offline. Thanks for attending, and everyone, and thanks for Emily and Danilo. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.